Welcome back to another episode of the Jacob Johnston Show. So I want to go ahead and ask you this question up front. Do you think 2021 will be the year that the Democrat Party abandons Black Lives Matter? I mean, think about this. Right now, the Democrat Party's support of Black Lives Matter is based off of the simple truth that Black Lives Matter is a useful political tool, a bludgeon in order to be able to attack their political opponents with. And as such, so long as they continue to be a useful political tool, Black Lives Matter will get a free pass on everything. Looting, arson, domestic terrorism, even going out and calling for and celebrating when someone is murdered that they disagree with. The Black Lives Matter movement gets a free pass on everything because they're a useful political tool. But at what point does Black Lives Matter stop being useful and become a political liability? Now, we've seen the Democrats do this in the past. I mean, remember, with the KKK, they were wholeheartedly only supported by the Democrats, only financed by the Democrats, because at the time, they believed that the KKK was a useful political tool. And once the KKK stopped being a useful political tool and became politically toxic, that's when the Democrats finally dropped them. Of course, then they tried to rewrite history and claim that the KKK was right-wing and all of that. And I'm sure at some point, when Black Lives Matter becomes too inconvenient for the left, they're going to try and claim that Black Lives Matter was a right-wing organization. But the monster that they had created with Black Lives Matter and all the support and free passes that they gave them is now coming back to bite them in the ass, as the members of Black Lives Matter start developing overinflated egos, thinking that there's nothing that they can do that the Democrats can punish them for. And so they can take over the party and basically do whatever they want. And as such, they are now thinking that they're in control of the Democrat Party and are trying to boss around, harass, and threaten local, state, and federal leaders of the Democrat Party. Now, if there's one thing that you can count on, is that the Democrat Party will protect its own power, especially the Democrat Party establishment, and they'll do anything and everything that they need in order to do that. So we see Black Lives Matter once again biting the Democrats in the ass, as they have surrounded the vehicle of a councilwoman and held her hostage in that vehicle for about an hour and a half, demanding that she signs their list of demands. Here's what that looked like.
I cannot make any formal decisions to which I am being asked to make on a Sunday afternoon.
City Council Vice President Andrea Jenkins says that activists held her captive in her car for 90 minutes while forcing her to agree to their demands.
That's the man. Leave George Floyd Square alone.
Yeah!
Period.
All right. Period. Leave it alone. So don't do my job is what you're
No.
Mayor Fry says he does not believe what took place is protected speech.
Now, the one good thing in this particular video is at least they weren't violent. At least they didn't violently attack the city councilwoman. But what they did do is they surrounded her vehicle and basically trapped her, making it impossible for her to be able to leave, and wouldn't let her leave until she signed their list of demands. They wouldn't get out of her way. That is not protected speech. That is not protected by the First Amendment. They weren't on public property. This was a person in their own private vehicle trying to get from where they were to where it is they needed to go. And they were being blocked. They were being harassed. They were being told, you can't go until you sign this list of demands, which, by the way, no matter what, at that particular moment, nothing she signed is legal or able to be held up in court. But that's not the point for Black Lives Matter. Now, as the Right Scoop reports, BLM mob holds city council member hostage until she signs their list of demands. A Minneapolis city leader says she is traumatized after protesters held her against her will. City Council Vice President Andrea Jenkins says activists held her captive in her car for 90 minutes while forcing her to agree to their demands. Activist Donald Hooker Jr. So here's something. They know who it is. They know specifically who it was. One of the activists seen on video confronting Jenkins says he asked her about police accountability, defunding police, and returning George Floyd Square to the people. We were having a conversation. I was trying to keep her accountable. And I said, well, we will just have to show up and do a protest at your house, a friendly protest. And then that's when she blew up in my face, Hooker Jr. said. Jenkins said she was traumatized and tried to defuse the situation. By walking to her vehicle, she came in only to be surrounded and held against her will while forced to agree to demands of those surrounding her. Now, let's point out here that signing something under duress is not legally binding, nor does it show any actual agreement. It would not hold up in court. Before I continue on in the article, but that's not the point of Black Lives Matter. They just needed her signature on their list of demands. Therefore, if she doesn't actually stick to it and go through with that, then they can run their own candidate and say, hey, look, this is what she promised in writing that she would do, and she didn't do it. And therefore could basically run a campaign based off of her breaking her word, broken promises, yada, yada, yada. And the only way to avoid that is to give them exactly what they want, which is try to promote and pass their list of demands. Either way, Black Lives Matter wins. Anyways, as we continue on, including the immediate resignation of Mayor Jacob Frey. I walked away and then he followed me here, Jenkins said in the video. Mayor Jacob Frey says he does not believe what took place is protected speech. Yes. So you know what? Showing up at a person's private residence to harass them and then following them around when they get into the vehicle and then surrounding them and holding them hostage until they sign your list of demands, that is not protected speech. There is under no circumstances is that protected by the First Amendment. That's not even peacefully, and they go through and they yell at her through a megaphone. I mean, what she should have been doing is calling the police, but she can't do that because she has supported Black Lives Matter and defund the police movement. So that would be hypocritical. So what happens? Black Lives Matter bit her in the ass. And I'll get more to that a little bit more. Anyways, it goes on. I will certainly let the council vice president speak for herself. We did have a conversation and she made very clear that it was under duress, Frey said. It has nothing to do with First Amendment speech. First Amendment speech is about having the ability to express yourself, not the ability to compel somebody else under duress to take your position and enact your speech. Or intact your speech. All right. He is furious Jenkins was held against her will. I don't care what your positions are, Democrat, Republican, Independent, everyone should be speaking out against this, Frey said. The issue you are fighting for, you should not hold people against their will and compel them to take your position under duress. That's fundamentally wrong. It's anti-democratic. But Hooker Jr. says it's all about holding her accountable for what he calls her inactions. I do believe that she knows what the people want and she understands what the power of the people looks like, Hooker said. At this particular point in time, I want to be able to go off and say, ha ha, Nelson Muntz, ha ha, you created this monster and now it's coming back to bite you in the ass. You're the one that said that they can do anything. It's free speech. Even burning down police stations are free speech. And now you're going to whine and claim to be traumatized and victimized by the very people engaged in the very tactic that you applauded, celebrated, and said was their right when they were doing that against your political opponent. Now the monster has turned on you. And now they're trying to use the same tactics that they used on Republicans on you. And you want us on the right to feel sorry for you? I'm going to laugh at you. Now, of course, I'll support any action that you take against Black Lives Matter, in order to shut them down. Sure, We may have different reasons for that, but I would agree to support anything that shuts them down. Now, why couldn't you just call the police? Oh, yes, because you supported the whole Black Lives Matter and the fake narrative that the police are systemically racist, targeting black people. And so you couldn't call them, which means that you were as much responsible for holding yourself hostage as the protesters or Black Lives Matter was. Because you refused to call the police because you didn't want to be called out for the hypocrite that you are. But in any event, this is what happens when you are anti-police. You give criminals free rein, and eventually those criminals will come back to bite you. So we go back to the question that I posed at the beginning of this video. If Black Lives Matter continues to do this and continues to use the tactics that they used against Republicans, against sitting members of the Democrat Party, elected members of the Democrat Party, will the Democrat Party eventually get to the point where they say, you know what? They've outlived their usefulness. You know, they're no longer politically useful. They're getting too much of an ego, and now they're being too inconvenient to us. Therefore, guess what? Black Lives Matter. You're done. You're finished. You're no longer being supported. And any criminal activity that you engage in, you will be held accountable. Now, the activist wants to say about holding the city councilwoman accountable. Well, you know what? How about someone holds you accountable? You accountable. You broke several laws in what you did. Who's going to hold you accountable? All right, so I mean, this is just kind of one of those things where it's just funny to go off and see how leftists eat their own and how the monsters that they create inevitably come back to bite them in the butt. But I actually encourage this. Hey, you know what? Black Lives Matter. Keep going after Democrats like this. Keep doing that. Because only by you going after Democrats like you have Republicans will the Democrats abandon you, and your organization will fall just like the KKK fell. All right, so that's it for this episode. I want to know your opinions. At what point do you think the Democrat Party will abandon their support of Black Lives Matter? Leave me comments down below. All right, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much, and I will be back again soon.